After my husband hit me during Christmas dinner, I went to bed without saying a word. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of cinnamon and found the dining table filled with all kinds of roasted meats. He said, "Good, you finally understand." But the moment he saw who was sitting at the table, his expression changed instantly. This Christmas, I decided to host the party right in the three-bedroom house my husband and I owned in Detroit. The small home it took me nearly 3 years to finish paying off. I hung a wreath on the front door, wrapped firefly lights around the banister, and set a nearly 2-meter tall tree in the corner of the living room. I wanted everything warm, everything beautiful, like a reminder to myself that I still had enough strength to create peace, even though my heart had already begun to crack in ways I didn't dare look at directly. The only guests were my in-laws, Robert and Lorraine, and my sister-in-law, Natalie. The three of them always acted pleasant, polite, but I knew they constantly scrutinized everything I did, from the food I cooked to the way I set the table. I'd gotten used to it. Being a daughter-in-law in this family wasn't something I felt confident about, but at the very least, tonight I wanted things to stay calm. I was preparing the turkey while wearing my headset to guide a young resident through managing an acute myocardial infarction at the hospital. That was my job, a 35-year-old cardiologist, always on call even while standing in my own kitchen. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the air, blending with the faint piano notes from the Christmas playlist I'd set on low in the living room. And then, I heard the thing that made my entire world collapse. Braden, my husband, was standing in the next room, his voice low, harsh, frantic. "Jessica is 12 weeks pregnant. It's a boy. I don't know what to do, Mom." I froze. The knife slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a sharp metallic crack. The turkey wings I'd forgotten to flip had burned black on one side. And in that moment, every sign from the past months, the strange perfume on his shirt, the late nights, the phone always face down, the emergency meetings in the middle of the night, all surged back at once, slamming into me like an icy gust. When I turned my head, I caught Lorraine's eyes. They didn't show shock, not surprise, but worry mixed with something that felt like prior knowledge, as if this wasn't new to her, as if she had stayed silent for far too long. I reached for the roasting pan, but my hands began to shake. I tried to steady myself, but my quickening breath betrayed me. I had lived with Braden long enough to sense something worse was coming, and it came faster than I could turn away. Braden walked straight into the kitchen, saw the burnt turkey, threw me a look dripping with contempt, and slapped me so hard I fell against the wooden cabinet. A sharp line cut across my cheek, his nail leaving a long bleeding red mark. My in-laws saw it clearly. My sister-in-law saw it too. But no one said a word. They simply returned to the meal, trying to resume their conversation about the new Starbucks opening nearby. I looked down at the turkey dish in my hands, trying to find my own breath. As a doctor, I knew the wound wasn't deep enough to require immediate stitches, and if I left the house right then, I would lose every piece of evidence. So I stood up, calm within the burning pain, and continued cleaning as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile at my in-laws, poured them more wine, welcomed them as perfectly as any hostess could. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "If you don't stand up this time, you will die in silence." After the party, all three of them left early. I heard their car rolling down the driveway. The moment the door closed and the house was left with only me and Braden, passed out on the sofa, reeking of alcohol, the atmosphere changed completely. No more pretending, no more smiles, no more silence. Only me, with a torn face, a crushed heart, and a plan forming sharply in my mind. A plan in which Braden would never again have the chance to raise his hand against me. I stood still in the kitchen, bathed in nothing but the amber glow spilling across the countertop, listening to the steady sound of Braden snoring from the living room. Strangely, I wasn't trembling anymore. Instead came a cold, clear focus, sharper than any scalpel I'd ever held in an operating room. I cleaned the gash on my cheek, placed a thin bandage over it, and looked in the mirror. My face was a strange mix of pain and resolve. No tears, Not a trace of softness. I had crossed a very different threshold. Braden lay face down on the couch, one hand loosely gripping an unfinished beer. He was too drunk to even flinch. I stepped closer, gently lifted his head, and held his phone up to his face. Less than a second. Face ID unlocked. A soft ping I'd never once heard in 7 years of marriage. I went straight to recently deleted, and my heart froze. A 27-second video. I tapped it lightly. Under dim yellow light, Braden had filmed himself with a blonde woman in a bedroom. Just a single glance and I knew. This wasn't someone new. This was someone he'd seen many times. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, red nails wrapped around his neck. Both of them were laughing. That low, conspiratorial kind of laugh, shared by two people certain they'd never be caught. And then I heard his voice, loud and clear, whispering with arrogant calm. "Don't worry. My wife and I are working on the divorce papers. She'll be out of my life soon." There was no rush of heartbeats, no panic, only a terrifying stillness flooding over me. I restored the video and uploaded it straight to my personal Google Drive. The one I used for storing medical reports, the one Braden didn't know the password to. I opened our banking app. The list read like an indictment. 25 transactions, over $35,000, all sent to Jessica M. in the past 9 months. He had used the money I'd saved through relentless work, meant for our family's stability, to fund his affair. I turned on iPhone location history. The records were crystal clear. Apartment 14B, 3 times a week, for 6 straight months. Each red dot on the map hit me like a punch to the chest. 3:14 a.m. I turned on the bathroom light and took photos of every angle of the injuries. The slash on my cheek, the bruise on my jaw, the scraped skin on my arm. I sent everything to myself, and to Tiana, the only close friend I trusted. Back in the bedroom, I saw the white dress I'd worn earlier snagged on the corner of the table. A streak of blood stained the shoulder, Braden's nail marks still vivid. I folded it carefully, sealed it in a Ziploc bag, and zipped it shut. This was no longer clothing. This was evidence. Finally, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened a small pale blue notebook. I wrote in capital letters, each stroke as steady as if signing a verdict. 5 o'clock, call Laura. 5:15, call police. 6 o'clock, prepare the table. 6:30, greet the new dawn. I closed the notebook, set it at the center of the table, and stared at that final line. No more fear. No more desperate hope. No more of the love I once tried so hard to protect. Only one truth remained. Tomorrow morning, Braden would come face to face with a woman who would no longer stay silent. I put the notebook down, stood up, and looked around the kitchen, where just hours ago I had been struck like I meant nothing in my own home. Now everything had shifted. I turned on every kitchen light. I wanted brightness. I wanted clarity. I wanted him to see everything he had done. I began preparing the most perfect breakfast of my life. I kneaded the dough for cinnamon rolls, the soft resistance beneath my fingers oddly calming. I sprinkled cinnamon, mixed butter and brown sugar, rolled it into spirals, and placed them on a tray. The warm scent of spice filled the house, Braden's favorite smell, one I had made for him every Christmas as a ritual of love. And now it became a scent of farewell. While the dough rose, I fried bacon glazed with brown sugar and a thin layer of cayenne, a combo that delivered that perfect crunch he once bragged to his coworkers about, saying, "My wife makes the best breakfast in all of Detroit." Then came the fruit. I sliced apples into fan-shaped petals, carved mango into stars, and trimmed strawberries into tiny flower blooms. I used to do these to impress my mother-in-law. Today, I did them so that when the police looked at this table, they would know I was lucid, in control. Not the frantic liar Braden would soon try to paint me as. I brewed his favorite strong coffee last, pale crema rising to the surface, just the way he liked it. He once told me, "I can forgive anything except bad coffee." I smiled faintly as I set the cup down. Forgive? Not once had I ever needed his forgiveness. When everything was arranged into a flawless spread, still glowing from the remnants of Christmas candlelight, I turned to the mirror on the fridge. I didn't cover the bruise. I didn't hide the gash. I even gently wiped the bandage so the wound showed more clearly. I wanted him to see. I wanted the police to see. I wanted the world to see. At last, I took the small camera I had prepared and moved to the head of the table. I lifted the tissue box lid, slipped the tiny camera inside, and adjusted the angle. Dead center on the table, aimed perfectly at the chair where Braden sat every morning. The moment he entered the kitchen, everything would be recorded. His eyes, his reactions, his denials, and his downfall. I looked at the clock. 4:58 a.m. I heard Detroit's wind howl outside the window. It was still dark, but my kitchen glowed. Not just from the light bulbs, but from the resolve of a woman who had waited far too long to rescue herself. I called Laura at 5 a.m., called the police at 5:15, and sent in all the evidence. They arrived just 10 minutes before Braden woke, sitting quietly in the dining room, as part of the dawn I had written in that notebook the night before. I sat on the chair, hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee, to keep myself awake, listening to every sound in the house, waiting for morning. And finally, I heard it. The familiar sounds of Braden shifting, stirring, feet hitting the wood floor. The only difference was, this morning, I didn't run into the kitchen to serve him coffee. Braden rubbed his eyes, stumbled into the hallway. As soon as the scent of cinnamon from the oven hit him, he inhaled deeply, smirked. That smug grin of a man who believed his wife had learned her lesson after a beating. Good. You finally understand, he said without even looking at me. His breath still reeked of last night's booze, but his tone was confident, as if nothing had happened. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, silent, like a mirror about to reflect the truth he never expected. Braden stepped a few more feet into the dining room and froze instantly. I will never forget that moment. In the pale golden light of morning, two uniformed officers sat at the Christmas breakfast table, calmly sipping coffee from the cups I had washed just the night before. And Laura, my attorney, sat confidently at the head of the table, in the exact spot Braden usually took each morning, her laptop open, a thick TRO file laid out with the first page already marked. The silence was so sharp I could hear the cinnamon rolls crack gently in the oven behind us. Braden turned to me, his eyes wide, face drained of color. "Kay, what is this?" His voice trembled for real. For the first time, I saw Braden afraid. I stood up, gently set my cup on the table. The light fell across my bruise and the slash on my cheek, uncovered, unhidden. I looked him straight in the eye and said in a calm voice so steady it surprised even me, "You don't get to eat this breakfast, Braden." He stepped back, but Officer Daniels was already on his feet. He opened his notebook, voice clear and professional. "Mr. Braden Miller, you are under arrest for assault causing injury and domestic abuse. The home surveillance footage, visible injuries on your wife, and her immediate testimony required our action this morning." Braden said nothing. Only I remained still, quietly watching him, and for the first time in years, the light outside our Detroit window didn't feel cold anymore. Braden opened his mouth to say something, but Officer Daniels stepped forward, the black gloves on his hands tightening slightly as a warning, and Braden instinctively backed against the wall, his panicked eyes darting from me to the two officers before landing on Laura, as if searching for a way out of the very room he had once considered his own territory. But this morning, this kitchen no longer belonged to him. "Face the wall, hands behind your back," Officer Daniels said in a voice so calm it chilled the air, and Braden tried to stand straight, but I could clearly see his shoulders trembling, the tremor of fear, the same fear he had used to dominate me now turning back upon him. The click of the handcuffs rang sharp through the space still glowing with Christmas lights. The 2-meter tree continued to shine, the red and gold ornaments reflecting the image of Braden being pressed down against the dining table, a sight utterly opposite to the proud, domineering, violent man he had been the night before. Laura rose from her seat, closed the case file, and spoke clearly, firmly. The police have all the evidence. From this moment on, Kimberly is protected by law. Braden tried to turn his head to look at me, his mouth opening as if to voice an apology or a threat, but no sound came out. The room was too bright, too real, leaving no space for lies. Officer Daniels began documenting everything, listing each charge: severe domestic assault, visible injuries, emergency testimony, in-house video. I did not interrupt, I only watched, as though witnessing the first surgery of my life, one where the patient was not someone I needed to save, but the truth I needed to free. Laura turned to me and gave a small nod. The TRO will be processed immediately. A judge will sign it within a few hours. I nodded. No tears, no smile, only a single feeling spreading quietly through my chest. The silence of a battle I had waited far too long to begin. As the officers led Braden to the door, the morning light fell across his face. Once confident, once arrogant, now pale, drained, twisted with fear. And I stood there in a kitchen still scented with warm cinnamon, knowing that, for the first time, he had to face reality without hiding behind his fists. The door closed behind Braden, leaving me alone in the house that had just endured the greatest storm of my life. But I knew this was only half the truth. The other half lay somewhere else, in the blonde woman from the 27-second video I had watched without blinking. I wiped my hands, sat down, and opened Instagram, recalling the small wave tattoo on her wrist, the detail revealed in the footage. And I searched keywords for nurses in the Detroit area, filtering through images until it took only 8 minutes to find her. Jessica M., 24 years old, pediatric nurse, profile picture showing blonde hair, a bright smile, and a wave tattoo on her left wrist. I sent a short message. "We need to talk. This is about Braden." Less than 3 minutes later, she replied, "Where are you? I can meet right now." We chose a Starbucks near the hospital, crowded, safe, a place where no one would notice two women speaking in the corner. When I walked in, I recognized her instantly. Jessica sat curled up in her chair, clutching a hot latte. And beneath the thick layer of foundation, I could still see an old yellow bruise fading on her cheek. There was a flicker in her eyes when she saw the slash on my face, as if she wasn't surprised a man like Braden could do this. "Kimberly?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded and sat, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke, until Jessica let out a long, painful breath, as though holding a secret had been crushing her chest. You know everything, don't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. She looked down, her hands tightening around her cup. "Braden hit me twice," she said, her voice breaking on twice. And in that moment, I understood. We were not on opposite sides. We were both victims of the same man. She spoke slowly. "He told me you were cheating, that you neglected the marriage, that you two were doing divorce paperwork, that I was the only one who understood him." Jessica closed her eyes, chest rising and falling as she fought humiliation. I listened, patient, silent. I no longer grew angry at women, only at the man who had forced two women to sit here drowning in shame he created. We talked for more than 20 minutes. I showed her the photos of my injuries, the transfer records, and part of Braden's video so she would know I wasn't lying. Jessica began crying, collapsing forward with her face in her hands. I didn't know he did this to you. I'm sorry, I swear I didn't know." I placed my hand on hers, gentle, without judgment. "You're not the one who caused this, but you can help end it." Jessica lifted her head, eyes red but filled with resolve. I'll be a witness. I'll tell them everything about him hitting me. I kept photos of my bruises. I can't let that man destroy anyone else." Then she inhaled sharply, as if remembering something important. "Oh, and one more thing," she said softly. I looked right at her as she touched her stomach, and then lowered her hand. A subconscious gesture. I'm not pregnant." She spoke slowly, meeting my eyes. "I was never pregnant." Braden told me to say that to pressure you into signing the divorce faster. In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. Her voice trembled but stayed firm. He made everything up. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, feeling a heavy fog lift from my chest. Braden had not only betrayed me, he had constructed an entire lie to destroy my life. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because now I wasn't fighting alone. After meeting Jessica, Laura and I returned to the law office, the dim light from the window falling over stacks of thick files and making the room feel like a legal trench, one where I had to dig down through every layer of truth Braden had buried. Laura slid a freshly printed set of documents toward me, just received from the bank after an emergency request. I checked the financial activity from the past 3 months. But, Kimberly, she paused, her voice lowering, there's something you need to see right now. I leaned over the pages, and on the very first line, my heart constricted. 2 hidden accounts, both under Braden's name, but using alternate email addresses and a different mailing address. I turned to the second page, and everything collapsed again. Not from pain, but from a deeper, more calculated betrayal. $90,000 withdrawn from my retirement fund. Laura tapped the detailed log. You asked him to handle your taxes last year, didn't you? I nodded, throat tight. That gave him temporary access to your retirement account, and he used the exact window when you were on call to transfer the money into his hidden accounts. I stared at the number, $90,000, feeling as though I were staring at 90,000 days of hope I had once invested into this marriage. It was the money I had saved through night shifts, surgeries, and countless nights falling asleep in my office chair. And he drained it like water from a faucet. Laura scribbled notes, her tone sharp. We're adding charges of marital financial abuse. In Michigan, this is a serious offense, especially with proof he used tax access privileges to steal personal assets. I sat motionless for a moment until Laura placed her hand on mine. Kimberly, I know this is more than any one person should endure, but you've done everything right, and right now, the truth is on your side. Every layer of deceit he built is collapsing. I took a long breath, feeling a sting at the bridge of my nose, but shedding no tears. I didn't cry anymore. My tears were no longer for him. Everything only reinforced one truth. Braden hadn't just harmed my body. He had tried to destroy my future. And now, the law would hold him accountable, not only for his fists, but for every stolen number he moved in the dark. 3 months later, I stood in the hallway of Wayne County Courthouse in the freezing early spring of Detroit, clutching the folder in my hands. Not out of fear, but because I knew this was the last time the name Braden Miller would ever have power over my life. The door to courtroom 4 swung open. I stepped inside and saw Jessica seated in the witness box, her hands clasped tightly. When our eyes met, she gave a small nod, a silent promise that, today, both of us would put an end to the man who had wrecked our lives. The judge entered. Everyone stood. And the trial began. Jessica was called first. She stepped up, hands slightly trembling, but her voice was startlingly firm. Your Honor, these are the photos of my injuries, from the 12th of last month. She submitted 2 images showing bruises on her shoulder and collarbone, documented in her hospital file. She then read aloud a message Braden had sent her. If you open your mouth, I'll make sure both women never know peace. The courtroom murmured. The judge frowned. The prosecutor requested permission to play the next video. The 27-second clip from Braden's phone appeared on the big screen. No one in the room even breathed. The moans, the words spoken by Braden, all rang out with chilling clarity. My wife and I are doing divorce papers. She'll be out of my life soon. Braden bowed his head, and for the first time, I saw him shrink like a man stripped bare beneath glaring light. Next, a representative from the hospital where I worked was called to the stand. They presented the medical report of my injuries on Christmas night. Gash, bruising, swelling, all matching the police report filed the morning of December 26th. The courtroom remained silent, but I could feel the truth cornering Braden like a rising tide. And then came the final blow, one no one expected. The prosecutor played another clip, security footage from a restaurant 2 weeks before Christmas. The screen showed Braden grabbing Jessica's arm hard, shoving her into a staff restroom wall. A slap, so violent her head snapped to the side. The entire courtroom gasped. Braden looked up, face ashen. This time truly pale, with nothing left to deny. "Mr. Miller," the judge said, voice ice-cold and commanding, "you did not only assault your wife, you assaulted your mistress, committed financial abuse, and built an elaborate web of lies that spanned months." The gavel came down 3 times, echoing through the room. Court sentences the defendant to 10 years in state prison. 10 years. I heard each word, each syllable, reverberating in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't revenge, it was release. I tightened my grip, walked out of the courtroom, and felt like Detroit that day was brighter than ever, not because of the sun, but because I had finally stepped out of the shadow Braden cast. That night, as I sat on the pale gray couch in my now quiet home, a new email notification popped up in my work inbox. I thought it was a surgical schedule, until I opened it, and my heart clenched in a different way. "Kimberly, I should have said this a long time ago." The email was from Allison, a former medical resident I worked with in 2019. She wrote a long message, each line tearing open a buried secret. "Braden assaulted me after a hospital party. I didn't report it because he was your husband, and I was afraid no one would believe me." I sat frozen, hands resting on the keyboard, unable to type a single word. I thought I had seen the full extent of his darkness. I hadn't. I had only seen the surface. A few days later, when an article about the trial was published in the Detroit Free Press, 2 other women reached out to me via Facebook Messenger. One was Megan, a former barista from a shop near my home. The other was Tanya, an ex-colleague of Braden's in the sales department. Both shared similar stories: groping, threats, stalking. None of them had enough evidence to press charges. I hosted a small gathering in my living room. We sat in a circle around the table, cups of steaming tea between trembling hands, remembering old fears. None of us were the other woman. None of us broke my family. We were simply women who survived the same predator. As my story spread online, especially after Jessica posted a thank you message to me for giving her the courage to testify, something I never expected happened. On Twitter, a small hashtag began appearing in posts from women across Detroit. #JusticeForKimberly. Then it spread to Facebook, to Reddit, to women's support groups, to medical forums where I worked. I stared at my glowing phone screen in the dark, and for the first time, felt something deeply real. My story was no longer just mine. It had become a voice for women who had once stayed silent like me. I turned off my phone, set it on the table, and realized how exhausted my body had become. For months, I had run on adrenaline, on rage, on survival instinct. But now, as the storm quieted, the tension stored in my body began to dissolve into a deep, aching fatigue. I knew I needed to change something. That week, I began jogging each morning around the neighborhood, just the first 20 minutes, but enough to feel my body slowly release the aftershocks of PTSD I had buried deep. The steady rhythm of my feet, my own breathing, the cold but clean Detroit wind. Together, they helped me feel alive again after being trapped in a long nightmare. One morning, as I returned to my gate, my heart caught in my chest. Braden's parents were standing there. Lorraine held her arms tightly around herself, as if struggling to remain upright. Robert stared down at the ground, his shoulders trembling in the early cold. It was the first time I had seen them there, without Braden by their side. I stopped, still panting from the run. "Kimberly!" Lorraine called my name, her voice hoarse like someone who'd cried all night. I said nothing. She stepped forward, then paused, perhaps afraid I'd recoil from the memories burned into that house. "We haven't slept in weeks," she said, her trembling hand on her chest. "Not because of the trial, not because of the news, but because of our silence." Robert looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, stripped of all the confidence and authority he once held. We were afraid of Braden for too long, he said, voice choking on every word. Afraid of his temper. Afraid he'd do something reckless. And we let that fear make us fail our daughter-in-law. Lorraine broke into tears. Not soft weeping, but deep sobs from the throat. I saw the video the police sent, she said, her voice shaking violently. Kimberly, I didn't know he treated you like that. I should have protected you, but I stayed silent, and that's just as terrible as what he did. I stood still. I didn't step forward. I didn't step back. I looked at them with the eyes of someone who had been through enough pain to understand. Sometimes, an apology that comes late can still mean something. I took a deep breath and gave a small nod. Not full forgiveness, not forgetting, but a quiet period to close a chapter. I returned to my life. Long hospital shifts, emergency heart surgeries, early morning jogs to keep my mind clear. But amidst that new calm, something unexpected happened. I began dating again. William entered my life in the gentlest way possible. A high school history teacher, warm, soft-spoken, always smiling, and genuinely curious about my day at the hospital. He brought a sense of safety I thought I had lost forever after my marriage with Braden. The first 6 months were genuinely peaceful. We had dinner dates, watched documentaries. Sometimes he brought muffins his students had baked. I thought I had opened a door I once locked tightly. But then, the little signs began. So small. But I, someone who had lived in the shadows of control, couldn't miss them. First, William started asking which shifts I had, when I'd be home, who I was working with. It seemed harmless at first, but then he wanted me to check in every time I arrived home. One time, I turned off my phone during surgery, as required, and returned to find 14 missed calls. He asked, "Where were you? Why didn't you answer? Who were you with? Did someone drive you home?" To others, it might have looked like concern. To me, it was Braden in miniature. I remember that night when he held my hand and said, "I just want to make sure you're not hiding anything." I pulled my hand back, as if it burned. I looked at him long, hard, and in that moment, I knew the answer. I didn't need another man who turned concern into control, who disguised chains as care. I ended it immediately. No negotiation, no lengthy explanations, just one sentence. I've lived through this before. I won't live through it again. William called a few times afterward, but I didn't answer. This time, I wasn't the trembling woman I once was. I knew exactly where my boundaries lay. 3 months later, one morning while sipping coffee and watching the local news, a video flashed across the screen. Shocking footage. William, the man I had once dated, was shown grabbing a female student by the collar in class, shoving her into a whiteboard, and slapping her hard. The video went viral nationwide. Parents protested. The school suspended him. I set down my coffee cup, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a truth that rang loudly in my mind. My instincts had once again saved me from a dangerous man. I took a deep breath, looking out the window as Detroit's morning light streamed in. I didn't regret trying to love again. I was only grateful to myself for being strong enough to walk away in time. And perhaps because of that, on the first morning after the longest winter of my life, I stood in the living room and looked around the house, the place that had held so much darkness, and realized one thing. I didn't want to carry Braden's memories with me for another single day. I called a painter. I chose a creamy white to replace the cold gray Braden once liked. I took down the heavy drapes he used to block out the light and replaced them with soft sheer curtains so morning sunlight could pour freely into the bedroom. I hung up the little paintings I had bought on work trips, things Braden used to dismiss as clutter. I replaced the lights, the rugs, even the scent of the house with soft lavender. I repaired each corner, each detail, each creaking sound in this home, as if I were stitching together the wounds in my own body. This house, once a hell, where I was beaten, humiliated, controlled down to my very breath, was slowly becoming a place of safety, a place of my own. a place where mornings were bathed in sunlight, afternoons carried the sound of birds in the yard, and nights no longer echoed with angry footsteps. Braden used to forbid me from opening the bedroom window because the light gave him headaches. Now, every morning, I draw the curtains wide enough for the Detroit wind to come rushing in, tossing my hair, reminding me that I'm still here, and I have gotten out. After everything I had been through, I knew I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to help other women survive alongside me. I founded the Cinnamon Foundation, a support fund for women escaping domestic violence, helping them find safe housing, legal counsel, and PTSD therapy. I named the foundation after the cinnamon rolls I baked the morning of December 26th, the meal that marked the moment I stood up. News of the foundation spread through the hospital before I could even announce it officially. One afternoon, while I was signing paperwork, the department chair, a man of few words and strict demeanor, walked into my office. He placed an envelope on my desk and looked at me with an expression I had never seen in 10 years of working together. "Kimberly, I heard what happened, and I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner. This is my contribution." Inside the envelope was $50,000. I was too stunned to speak. But the real shock came 2 weeks later, when I received an email from the bank, a $150,000 donation from Lorraine Miller, Braden's mother. I thought I was seeing it wrong, but no, it was her name. That evening, Braden's sister messaged me. "Kimberly, that money came from my parents selling their house in the city and moving to the suburbs. They want to do the right thing," Mom said. "You've endured more than enough." I sat still on the sofa, the phone screen glowing in the dark, bringing a feeling both unfamiliar and warm. The next day, Lorraine called me. Her voice broke. "Kimberly, I watched the body cam footage of Braden being arrested, and I spent the entire night sitting in the living room. I realized I raised my son wrong, and that's a mistake I have to live with in order to atone." I didn't know what to say except for one sentence, soft as air. "Thank you for doing the right thing." And when the call ended, I understood. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was helping rebuild the lives of others, too. 3 months later, I received an unexpected invitation from the Detroit Medical Board. They wanted me to speak at their annual conference, this time under the theme, Recognizing Subtle Violence in Intimate Relationships. I stood backstage, microphone in hand, my nerves no longer shaking like they once did. On the large screen behind me was my name, no longer paired with Braden's surname, just Dr. Kimberly Carter, cardiology, advocate, survivor. The stage lights shone on my face, casting a soft glow over the faint scar on my cheek like a mark of survival. I began my speech with a story, real and simple. Not every punch leaves a bruise, but the most dangerous ones are the ones that make you believe you deserve it. The auditorium was so silent I could hear someone place their pen down. I spoke about the cinnamon rolls on the morning of December 26th, about the phone in the darkness, about the women who reached out to me after the trial. I looked down at the front row, where doctors, nurses, colleagues who had worked beside me every day were sitting, eyes reddening with every word I spoke, and when I paused, took a breath, and ended with one final sentence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is what we do to survive, until it's time to speak. The entire hall rose to their feet. Applause thundered, long, warm, without judgment, without doubt. For the first time in so many years, I felt seen, believed, respected for who I truly was, not as a shadow behind a man with status. I stood there, smiling softly in the light, and felt a truth resonate clearly. I had gone from victim to witness to the one standing tall on the stage of my own life. On a Sunday morning, light snow fell gently over Detroit. I woke early, turned on the oven, and made cinnamon rolls again, but this time just for myself, not to prove anything to anyone, not to trap anyone, not to preserve peace. Just to live a quiet morning, the kind I once thought I'd never have again. I placed the warm tray on the table. Morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a glow on the faint scar on my cheek. The scar I once hid, once hated, once cried over. Today, I touched it lightly and smiled. No shame, no avoidance. It was proof that I had risen from my own pain. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, raised it, and whispered, to myself, a private toast. I don't need a man to be happy. I just need myself. And a little more cinnamon. I slipped on my long red coat and stepped outside. A light dusting of snow coated the street. I walked through the white silence, the cold air brushing my face, but I no longer flinched. Final scene. I walk along the sidewalk, my red coat vivid against the snow, breath turning to mist, hands in my pockets, posture straight and light like someone who's finally laid down a heavy past. True freedom doesn't come from walking away. It comes from knowing you'll never go back. If this story moved you, and you'd like me to tell more journeys of strength like this, please hit like, subscribe, and share the video so other women can find the strength within themselves. Thank you for watching to the end.